Here we go.
What is up, fellow producers? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Connor Edwards, and here I give away free beats, and we also explore the art of music production. Now, today we're gonna dive headfirst into EQing your main vocal, one of the most important things that you can do to have that professional sounding vocal in your music. We're gonna explore 3 different ways that you can do that to have a better sounding main vocal. So let's dive right in. So the first and most essential way that we are going to EQ our main vocal is with a high pass filter. You might also hear this referred to as a low cut, but all a high pass filter is basically cutting out lows and letting highs pass through. This is essential because a lot of times you're gonna have some background noise or some low rumble, different things in a room that is not perfect, and a high pass filter can help to get rid of a lot of that. But you have to be very careful because the higher that you go up with your high pass filter, the more lows, the more body, the more presence that you are cutting out of your vocal. I say it all the time, trust your ears, but with this case, I would say do not take your high pass filter any higher than 100 hertz. Now, some people are gonna criticize that and say,
What are you talking about?
there's nastiness at 110, 120, 130, 140, 150 even. And yes, that is true, but you can deal with those things separately. Taking a high pass filter all the way to that point gets rid of absolutely everything below that and will take a lot of body and a lot of presence out of your vocal that you need to be there. So what I've learned in my 7 years of mixing vocals so far, and I'm always learning, is that don't take it any higher than about 100, and then whatever nastiness exists right above that, you can do a cut for that. The second way that we're gonna EQ our vocals is with what's called a dynamic EQ. Now, the reason we call this a dynamic EQ or a dynamic cut is because this is only going to be activated, it's gonna be dynamic, when that certain frequency, wherever you put it, is too much. So a lot of times in songs, you might have really high parts, you might have really low parts, you might have loud parts, you might have quiet parts. And sometimes there are certain frequencies that are too much in certain parts of the song, but you don't want to totally get rid of them because then maybe in a verse or in a bridge, you might need that there. And the vocal might sound totally different in that section of the song. So instead of having to totally separately process them, you can use a dynamic EQ, which is only going to cut and clamp down on that frequency when it gets too loud or when it gets to a certain threshold. I like to use these in my low mid-range, so from like 250 hertz up to about 500 hertz, because a lot of times, especially in louder parts of the song, around that 400, 450, trust your ears, I get just some nastiness and some harshness, some boxiness, you might would say, that I like to get rid of, but only when it's too loud. So a dynamic EQ works great for this. I use the FabFilter Pro Q3, which is, in my opinion, the best EQ that exists. But also, if you're like, I don't have the money to afford that, the TDR Nova is a free EQ plugin that also does dynamic EQ. It is perfect for this. You can solo and listen to what you're actually cutting and what it's being used on. It's great. And last but not least, the third way that we're gonna EQ our vocals is by actually boosting the high end with a high end shelf. Now, just like any kind of EQing, this is another one of those areas where you have to be extra careful because high end shelf sounds great and it adds a lot of crispy top end, but it can also add a ton of harshness. Trust your ears. What I like to live by is I like to boost the high end at 10K or higher, because I've found that if I'm boosting at 9K, 8K, 7K, even 6K, a lot of times there is a ton of harshness that lives anywhere in that region. And another rule that I personally like to live by, but you have to EQ your own voice and your own vocal, and every vocal is different, but a rule that I like to live by is always using a de-esser after my high-end boost or that high-end shelf. It just helps to make sure that I haven't added any extra sibilance or harshness on those S's and those T's and those ch's in the song. And as an added bonus, the Fresh Air plugin actually does this, and it is totally free, but I would just caution you to be very, very careful with how much you use of it. And I suggest using either a dynamic EQ or a de-esser after that, just to make sure that you haven't introduced a ton of harshness to your vocal that you probably worked really hard to get rid of before. And there you have it. That's 3 different ways that you can EQ your main vocal to have a better sounding vocal, a more professional sounding vocal. And as I said throughout the video, and as I always like to say, make sure that you trust your ears. If you found this video helpful, make sure that you give it a like and make sure that you subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you get updates and never miss a video on all things music production. See you next time.